First thing you do when you choose to play a piece like the Valse en La mineur by Chopin is first to determine the bass note the circle of fifths of Bach and before. Meanwhile, you have on the second and third beat harmonization of a triad. So in the typical fashion, Chopin's left hand are two hands. The bass, that you have to fetch with the third finger on the edge of the key because of the action being so heavy to play the precise note at the precise dynamic level. Perhaps just a hint or a sigh. Oh. Not dropping the finger from above, but the finger on the key halfway in, and then played very soft, dynamically, but fast in terms of the speed of depressing. And then you have, so to play together the chords on the white keys, you couldn't play them properly if you bend your fingers around it as taught, because in order to play them together, you want to assume that the tips of the cushion of the fingers will play at the same time. And that is so beautifully connected in order to harmonize the bass. The chord should be an emanation, echo of the bass line, and not a second beat harmonization. As if because of the bass note on the A, you hear the natural harmonics. But in minor, obviously that harmonics are in major because you hear the octave and then the fifth and then the major third, but very faintly. Obviously you don't do that. As we know by Chopin, the one hand should ignore what the others do. The challenge, if any, specifically about the melodic line of this one is how to repeat the note as a next note by replaying inside the key. Do, ho, si. I personally would have found less attractive if he had done because on the piano the neighboring tones are easier to play relatively in legato from close up inside the keys on the edge with a tiny bit overlapping legato, releasing the note that creates a tiny dissonance, but not by the foot and the pedal that would cover open and let all the resonance of all the dampers. And this way, even if you use some pedal, it's not a pedal for the left hand alone, so inevitably you englobe in the passing tones of the melodic line the pedal, which is there harmonically to hold the bass line over the two chords, since you don't have two hands for the left hand alone. So you have to compromise how much you want to wet the passing tones in the right hand step motion in order to keep a bass line over the harmonic or consistency of the chords that are on the second and third beat. Of course, you could argue that perhaps Chopin didn't want the bass line to stay 3 beats. It's not a dotted half in the notation, so it could be just by the pedal to a certain extent before it evaporates. A bit like an ephemeral moment. And because the second and third beat are repeated by quarter notes in the chords, they shouldn't be repeated fully. They should be repeated in the resonance of the chord. Do, ti. And then to fetch the next bass note, you want to reach fast by shifting, almost gliding the fingers over the keys in order to play after you touched, prepared the note, a note upon landing, because then you don't control much of the sound. And even if the bass goes off at the second beat, of course then comes the choice of the tempo. If you do or if you do slower, you extend the melodic line, but then the repeated note, do, do, si, si, it decays further if you play slower to pick it up from the decay. If you take in account the decay. And so a waltz is a dance, inevitably stylized for the piano, so it doesn't have to be danced. But still, you have to find a way to express the melodicity of the repeated note as a change of syllable. I want to tell you how much I wish to dance with you today, or something. So Chopin, using the repeated note, uses really the thematic material of an aria or of a song, the voice. You change syllables on the same note, it doesn't sound repeated. And because the middle of the phrase reaches the relative major C major, I don't agree with the diminuendo, which is tension release on the spot, musically correct, but because the phrasing stopping on a long half note, even if with the 2 grace notes delaying it, and then later it will continue. So you see, you want to arch your phrase, you want to play very soft, whispered your bass, and the chords, like muffled, like French horns with mutes. So the speed of shifting will define the tempo. If I count 1, 2, 3, I shift 1 and ready, 2, 3, shift, prepare, 2, 3, shift, prepare, play. Shift, prepare, play. And then this way the left hand remains in 3 beats, harmonizing each harmony on each bar. But the melody soars. It's not finished. And still not finished. Now, if you can bring that to be in a constant rising, not only in terms of range, but in dynamics, since you have to stretch that arching to the tonic. naturally, if you play it faster, the phrasing bar a beat by a group of 4, 8, 12, 16 bars of 3 beats becomes more natural. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's already a sub-phrase. But if you play it, then you're obliged to sustain more the passing notes in the eighth notes. And then you start being expressive in the crescendo within the short elements of eighth notes rhythmically. And your quarter notes or half notes become the release of the tension instead of... So if you lighten up the passing tones in the melody and you bring out the punctuation of the notes, which are the structural ones, or then you melodize the expression of the decorative eighth notes. And since we are in the early 19th century, and no more in the 18th century, though it's constructed by a certain group of bars, so you have a structure of the phrase that's relatively expected. The fact that you don't do then again, then again, and then again. Even without the stop, I can make it sound like that. And in fact, you want to have your right hand never drop, build up its expression, its melodic line, and the bass and the two chords are in 3/4, but the right hand would be in a 12/4, in a 24/4. And then we speak about the emotion, the meaning, the expression. Oh, it means so many things to so many people. Tenderness, inner search, some kind of abandon with the eighth notes, short, long, the harmony and the melody moving by a downbeat, short, long, that leaves longing for the next downbeat. So if you play pianissimo, it even sounds more like a reminiscence, therefore even more nostalgic. If you play very factual, or you play or even softer. So who's right, who's wrong? What should be taken in account? What should define the choice? The shifting, the repeated notes in the melody, the rising of the bass by force instead of descending fifths because of the range, or of course you don't hear that. You hear it. And then the purpose of the grace notes, group of two, a petite note as they call them in French, which are unmeasured, is to delay the arrival of the note that they're adorning before you hear it. So then the left hand should wait for the bass line to align. But if you diminish and make a ritonuto and delay the bass line, then you inevitably add almost a fourth beat, which then kills the idea that you play a dance and not only a stylized echo of a dance. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So there is a little room of margin where you can slightly extend the arrival of the through the, and And so if you play the bass on the time, it plays on the first part of the grace notes. But if you play on the arrival point for the real thematic note E, you have to play a bit of the earlier before the beat, the grace notes, and the arrival note to match the downbeat of the left hand without rubato in the left hand. But then you're obliged to squeeze them too tight, especially if the tempo is not too soft, too slow. You could do a fast tempo and slow grace notes since they're not measured. But I wouldn't advise it stylistically. I would go for a tempo that is relatively calm and then the tossed grace notes. So yes, the grace notes are melodized, but he didn't write them in a triplet, nor 2/16/8, nor 2/32 dotted 8. In fact, they're unmeasured. So they're unplaced and unmeasured compared to the bass note. And also, there is something that I think is essential when you want to play a waltz like this, is that you want to establish an atmosphere at the get-go. Sunsetting with una corda, that does not matter, but it helps. And start tiny bit under tempo, but not too affected. Whoever defines or decides the good taste about when it's too slow to be affected, when it's slow enough not to be affected, when it's a rubato just to start is slightly hesitant, in which case the repeated note of the melody is hesitant. Alfred Cortot used to delay the bass note on the melody. Now, systematically, it sounds almost anticipated. When you hear it, you expect it. So it takes away from that feeling of slight not togetherness, which gives that vulnerability, while the melody soars with some, let's say, definition of extreme decision. It's the hesitation comes in the grace notes and in the bass with the harmony. And very often when Chopin goes to the relative major is to have this glimpse of hope that major is compared to minor in terms of mood. And then he doesn't stay long because he wants you to feel as a performer through the score that, and share with the listener that it's short-lived hope. And then immediately return to A minor and not venture in C major. Of course, he didn't have these high notes either on his piano, and he wouldn't have done something so predictable, repetitive, yata-tam, tam, yata-tam, short, long to eighth notes, 2/4 notes. I often think that in order to play it more broken phrasing without to be disconnected, but still in a flow, with hesitance but tastefully, it's all those things that are said with their contrary constantly. You can practice it as even notes. And then start playing the rhythm. So finally, what do we search after we define the technique, the articulation, the dynamic range, the pedaling, harmonic, melodic, the pulse, is most importantly, in fact, the dynamic range. If you can sustain the heavy keys on the bass to speak soft without to be a hole, you're so more reassured by playing a straight finger from knuckle to tip on the edge of the keys for the leverage so that they're more reliably playing or playing personally. Of course, when you repeat the chord in the same pedal, it bubbles up, so it becomes louder. And if you want to avoid that bubble up of resonance, then you have to do a half pedal on the second repeated chord on the third beat here. To avoid. But in the relative major, C major, perhaps you should allow that crescendo 2, 3, because it is towards, even if short-lived, hope. Scriabin and other composers like Rimsky-Korsakov and many others associated colors to tonalities or chordal progressions. And therefore, the tonality in which it's written, when we have a fixed A at 440, so then we have a capacity to always hear it in A minor. If I play it for you in F minor, does it sound darker, deeper, perhaps a little bit more brooding? Or in E minor. Or semitone. And if you still do it in E minor but one octave higher, you obtain a different clarity. And if you keep the melody in the top and the bass down, you start hearing this spectral resonance of playing over the octave. But in Chopin's writing, the melody is close to the accompaniment, harmonization-wise. But the bass is deep and far-fetched. I think it's more for the depth of the resonance of this range rather than for the dynamic range. If not, he could have written. Of course, he could have. It's not up to me to be second-guessing him, though who am I? Nobody. Who is he? Everybody. And the students need concrete answers. He has written another A minor waltz. That this one I play a parlando, recitativo, spoken, almost as if I spell syllables on each eighth note or quarter note of the right hand, and the hesitance of the downbeat. This one. And if it's too much, it's chopped. If it's not enough, it's connected. It's in fact interrupted, but in the flow of continuation. Too emotional emotional to have taken in your expression enough breath to last for the sentence. So you have to catch your breath in the middle of the sentence. Here, it seems so much more settled and organized without delays or lack of downbeats like here. So de facto, the left hand and the right hand don't play almost together because of the delayed notes rhythmically, which here we can do by an interpretation. And again, the bass is so far away that gives that depth and not just that intimacy. Like his A minor, same tonality mazurka. Parisian and French by his father, while Polish from his homeland and his mother and his almost of his long life, which is in fact not so long, but gave us so much music. He inevitably combined for some of the ethnic mazurkas in 3 beats, a little bit what he does with the waltzes. Sometimes some of the mazurkas of Chopin sound like waltzes, like this. Well, you have these delays, these longings, these second beat delays. In fact, the affect in Chopin is either written in the texture, either it's up to you, especially like this one, where there is no break, seemingly a continuum. You have to choose which note you want to delay from the bass, but you shouldn't do all. Why? Because you have to have a sense of purpose in your storytelling. Not just for the affect or just for the analytical aspect of how many bars a sentence, musical speaking, but it's more about the intuition. Feel it, hear it, try it. Here, if I hesitate on the tonic, it's already at the get-go that I'm hesitant. If I hesitate at the subdominant, I sort of slow down the phrasing that goes into 5 of 3 into the relative major C major, secondary dominant. So if I delay it at the secondary dominant, even if I don't play it so slow, devil's advocate for myself, or then you delay it only at the arrival of the relative major, C major triad, in which case you play straight earlier before it. But to stop melodically in the passing tone F between G and E sounds artificial, even if it makes sense for the left hand. Harmonically for the right hand, why hesitate and delay there? We don't have syllables, we don't have words, we don't have lyrics, so we imagine. I still think in this case we have to go straight to the arrival point of the second T in the right hand before we breathe. 1, 2, 3, 4, and here. Perhaps that dislocation at the restart with an elegant rebirth of the sound, a rebounce of the resonance and the pulse as well. 2, 3. Imitating an imaginary pizzicato bass with resonance of the vibrato. And the muted harmony. It it demands each a different articulation, therefore anticipated preparation to not add a beat every time you change touch. And the right hand completely unaware of the left hand. It could have been, or in fact it doesn't matter, because the right hand plays this melodic line almost unharmonized. So I think that Chopin likes to be lyrical in the right hand, rhythmical in the left hand, and combined with harmonies that have to take with the note of the melody in first beat bar, is second beat and third beat, is the third that is dubbed in harmony, the C. But in the next bar, the F is dubbed, which is in the thumb of the left hand. Again, the E. So we have. So you can try to hint that there is a voicing clarity in the chords of the left hand, where the top of the thumb part is a little brighter than the lower thirds. Now Chopin doesn't indicate that and doesn't say that, but then you start sculpting in 3D discrete deep bass, voiced chordal. It's almost as if you don't need the melody, because you have in a way on the top of the chord a combination of melodic notes. But the nobility is to have the beauty in the inner voices, designed as if by themselves. While and all together. Expressively finding that you need more time to say things with slight delays, within tasteful, hopefully, delay, you can play. So who defines the boundaries? How slow is too slow? How fast is too fast? How do you implement the movement of the waltz, even if hinted in idealized way on the piano, with the mood of that typical of Chopin, regretful mood, nostalgia. I assume there are multiple truths, the different ways of playing it. It's not a single right and all the other wrong. Perhaps some are wrong to some at some point, but by myself I can say that I can very well try to be convincing and therefore convinced, translating, transmitting, carrying the melodic line in this tempo stretched. Or at the same time I can think, okay, let me try to do the same conviction but in a less slow tempo. If I want to be a little bit less soft, but that's too mundane. I want to be not too mysterious nor too mundane. I think that the choice should be made on the spur of the moment when you sit down to play it at a given circumstance, mostly for people rather than for a microphone. But I think that the spontaneity should be part of the interpretation, despite of all these acquired automatisms for gestures in muscular memory and sculpting of the sounds and prepared anticipation, organized melodic line with delayed bass and grace notes that adorn the melodic line with a little delay of some notes. All these are true things, but in fact at some point you just feel like going and then spread it. And then settle it to sit in its tempo, but still with a direction. And I think the quality of the tone, of course the instrument matters, but if you play, or you play, or you play, or you play, or, and the subtle soft demands also for left hand subtle soft bass, with the pedal after the note, so you can have the residue resonance only, like vibrato of a pizzicato. So carry yourself in the pulse with elegance, with a held back expression, and only blossom in the relative major.